The first time they saw a human warship. The galaxy laughed, not the nervous kind of laughter that came before a real fight, but the dismissive kind, the laughter of predators who think they've cornered something small, weak, and stupid. The ardent confederacy with their sleek crystal vessels and shimmering warp arrays called our ships iron coffins. The Surthan hives whispered to their brood queens that humanity was still crawling in mud, dragging guns behind them like apes with clubs. We knew what they thought of us. They thought our railguns, long steel barrels spitting chunks of hyper-accelerated tungsten, were nothing but toys. They had teleporters, disassembling soldiers atom by atom and throwing them across the battlefield. They had energy lances that could slice through rock like butter and gravitic shrouds that could collapse artillery fire into nothing, and we had slugs, dense, ugly physical pieces of metal accelerated until even physics strained under the stress. They called them primitive. They called us primitive, but steel has its own truth. I still remember the first battle. My ship, the Vanguard, was little more than a retold freighter with rail batteries bolted onto her hull. The Confederacy's patrol came gliding in, elegant ships, glowing with arrogance, their shields humming with radiant power. They sent a broadcast: primitive Terran, you will stand down or be atomized. We do not parley with stone throwers. Command didn't answer. We let the rail guns do the talking. The first slug hit their lead cruiser. Before they could finish laughing, no shields, no particle defense grid. Nothing stopped it because their technology had been built to counter plasma energy and warp distortions. Not a raw piece of tungsten screaming at 12 km/s. It tore through their bridge, split the vessel in two, and kept going. Silence. For one breathless moment, the galaxy's Arrogance cracked, then the screaming started, their comms flooded with shock, outrage, disbelief. Impossible. Primitive kinetics cannot breach. Before another slug courted the second ship. Their shields flared, tried to redirect. But they weren't designed for momentum, for something that didn't dissipate as heat or light, but carried mass and hate and velocity. The third volley shredded their last escort, sending crystalline shards scattering into orbit like broken arrogance glittering in the void. We were supposed to be an experiment, just another primitive race wandering too far from home, destined to bend knee to the civilized galaxy. Instead, we had just butchered their patrol with weapons they hadn't even considered worth countering. That day, the galaxy learned a word they would choke on for centuries: rail guns. But arrogance dies hard. They didn't admit their mistake, not at first. Instead, the Confederacy and their allies whispered excuses. A fluke, a trick, a desperate accident. They told themselves that teleporters and warp drives still placed them far above us. They told themselves that one skirmish meant nothing. They didn't understand what was coming because humanity had no illusions. We knew what we were: outnumbered, outgunned, out-teched, but we also knew the truth of war. Arrogance doesn't stop a slug. Shields that can bend light can't bend momentum, and the galaxy's proud fleets had never once prepared for a species that still believed in the raw power of steel. So we built more guns, bigger guns, planet-cracking cannons welded onto carriers, frigate swarms spitting metal storms that ripped holes through alien formations, rail batteries buried under Mars, under the moon, under every rock we could claim, and the aliens kept mocking right Up until the next fleet went dark, rail. Guns first, teleporters later. That was how it began. Because in the end, teleporters could only move soldiers into meat grinders. Faster, and Arrogance was just another shield waiting to shatter. Confederacy didn't stay quiet for long. The destruction of their patrol near Siriusir was a wound to their pride, and the galaxy's arrogance wouldn't let it heal without blood. They answered with fire. 2 months after Vanguard's victory, the sky over Mars turned into a graveyard. A fleet of 30 Confederacy warships folded into orbit, shimmering with the glow of their teleport arrays and gravitic shields. Their flagship alone was larger than any human ship by 5-fold, a blade of crystal and light, hanging above us like a god descending to crush ants. They didn't bother with diplomacy this time. No warnings, no broadcasts, just an ultimatum carved into the planet itself. Their first volley wasn't at us, it was at Olympus Mons. They courted the mountain with a lance of energy so precise it left a glowing scar hundreds of km long. That was their message. We are untouchable. I was in the orbital ring when the alarm sounded. The old station rattled as ships scrambled, frayers retold into makeshift war vessels, rail batteries charging with a hum that carried through the walls like an old predator's growl. Men rushed past me, faces pale, some terrified, others stone-faced. No one pretended we had the upper hand. We knew what was coming, and we knew it would be hell. Our first salvo fired as they approached. Tungsten rounds screamed from Mars' surface. Installations, rail slugs burning the void with silent fury. Dozens of projectiles streaked toward the Confederacy fleet, glowing white-hot as they ripped through space. And then they vanished. The enemy's teleport screens shimmered, snapping each slug out of existence the instant it touched their defensive veil. A trick of quantum mechanics, impossible to counter with anything we had. One moment our slugs flew true, the next they were scattered atom by atom into nothingness. The fleet kept advancing. Somewhere deep in my chest, my stomach turned to stone. This was the fear the galaxy wanted us to taste, the futility of resistance. Our strongest blows stripped away like child's play. Still we kept firing. Rail guns thundered from orbiting frigates. Carriers spewed slugs by the hundreds, and planetary batteries roared. The sky became a storm of streaking metal, enough to tear apart any human fleet, and still their shields shimmered, their teleporters erased. Their arrogance mocked us with silence. Hold fire, command finally ordered. The line crackled with static, the weight of despair thick in every voice. Save ammunition, they'll burn us dry if we waste it. It was the longest silence I've ever endured. 30 ships closing in, weapons glowing, teleport arrays spinning like halos of death. We braced ourselves for annihilation. Then came the sound. A single rail slug screamed through the void, ripping past the teleport field like it didn't exist. It tore through the Confederacy's lead destroyer, splintering its crystalline hull, igniting fuel cells until the whole ship went nova. Every voice in the command channel erupted. What's how? Later we learned what happened. One of our engineers, a man whose name history would forget but whose work saved us all, had adjusted the slug's coating. Simple alloy layering, magnetic distortion that made the projectile appear for the briefest moment like nothing more than space debris. Teleport screens failed to recognize it as a threat until it was too late. One shot, one breakthrough. The galaxy's arrogance cracked again. We fired every rail we had, coated slugs, tore through teleport screens like knives through paper. The fleet's perfect defense fractured under the raw brutality of steel. One by one, alien ships went down, their shields sparking, their hulls breaking apart under kinetic hellfire. But victory didn't come cheap. Their returned fire carved our fleet into corpses. A single energy lance gutted the Herald, a repurposed colony ship, splitting her hull down the middle. I saw escape pods vaporized mid-launch. Human screams cut short in bursts of static. Another volley erased 3 frigates beside us, leaving nothing but slag drifting in orbit. Mars burned. Orbital stations cracked and fell. Cities went dark under bombardments of gravitic waves that folded buildings like paper. It was slaughter, but it wasn't one-sided, not anymore. When the last Confederacy cruiser went nova, when the flagship limped out of orbit, trailing shards of crystal and molten light, humanity stood bloodied but unbroken. Thousands of us were dead. Half of Mars was in ruins, but for the first time, the galaxy had bled for underestimating us, and bleeding makes predators think twice. The galaxy called it an atrocity. News networks across alien space lit up with propaganda. Humanity wasn't a brave new power. They painted us as savages, brutes wielding barbaric kinetic weapons that tore through civilized defenses. They called us unfit for the stars, dangerous, unstable, a plague that had to be quarantined before it spread. That was their arrogance talking again, their fear dressed up as superiority. But we didn't care about their words. We cared about survival, and survival meant escalation. Factories on Earth and Mars went into overdrive, shipyards hammered steel into carriers, frigates, and planetary cannons. The moon became one giant barrel, rail platforms stretching across its surface like the teeth of some colossal predator. Every asteroid we could tow into orbit became a fortress, hollowed out and armed with guns that could spit slugs the size of trains. We were outnumbered, yes. Outteed, yes, but for the first time in galactic history, numbers and tech didn't guarantee victory. We had momentum. And men like me, men who had seen arrogance shatter under the fury of steel, were ready to bleed for that momentum. I was promoted after Mars, not because I deserved it, but because so many others were dead. They gave me command of the Resolute, a railgun carrier fresh from Earth's docks, still smelling of oil and sweat from the workers who had built her. With their bare hands, she was ugly compared to alien ships. Jagged plates of metal, guns bristling from every angle, engines cobbled together from old freighter parts. But she had teeth, and that was all that mattered. Our first mission came fast. Intelligence reported that the Confederacy was amassing near Titan, preparing a counterstrike. They wanted to prove that Mars was a fluke, that humanity's primitive guns couldn't stand against their full might. We were sent to prove them wrong. The Resolute joined a fleet of 12 carriers and 30 escorts, a force that would have been laughable by galactic standards, but was the largest humanity had ever launched. We cut through the void, rail batteries primed, every man on board, knowing this might be the last time we'd ever see home. When we reached Titan, they were waiting, 50 Confederacy warships glowing like shards of a god's crown. Their teleport screens spinning there. Weapons humming with power there. Formation was perfect, their confidence absolute. They thought they were about to crush us. The first volley came from them. Teleport flashes lit the void as soldiers rained down onto Titans. Surface, seizing ground, teleporting. Artillery into position. At the same time, their fleet opened fire, lances of energy slicing through the dark. Our lead escort disintegrated in seconds, vaporized without a chance to return. Fire, and still we advanced. Our slugs screamed into their formation. First volley, half neutralized by teleport. Screen, second volley, coated rounds. Punching through, tearing into their flanks, the void became a storm of light and metal, each impact sending shock waves of fire across crystal hulls. Battle was chaos, energy lances carved through our fleet like fire through paper, but every railgun strike that landed sent Confederacy ships into death spirals. Their teleporters swarmed Titan's surface, but every Marine they sent found themselves in the middle of slug impacts, bunkers collapsing around them, ground quaking as artillery struck. And in that chaos I saw something break in them, not just ships, not just soldiers, but arrogance. That untouchable confidence they carried, the belief that they were above us. It cracked, you could hear it in their comms, the shrill panic bleeding through their transmissions. Their weapons are bypassing screens. Shields failing, we need reinforcements. This is not possible, they are primitives, primitive, always that word. The same one they mocked us with, even as they died by the hundreds. When the battle ended, Titan was a graveyard. 20 Confederacy ships destroyed, the rest fleeing into the void, leaving behind shattered ground and burning colonies. We'd lost nearly half our fleet, but we had held more than held. We had slaughtered their arrogance again. The message spread fast across the galaxy. Whispers began to grow. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity wasn't backward. Humanity was dangerous. Railguns first, teleporters later. That was the truth. They couldn't deny anymore. And for the first time I felt the stirrings of something worse than fear in the galaxy's voice. Respect, but respect poison with hatred, because predators don't forgive prey for biting back. That was when the war truly began. After Titan, the galaxy could no longer laugh. The Confederacy's broadcasts grew quieter, their arrogance curdling into something darker. They didn't call us primitive anymore, not as often. Instead, they called us unclean, unstable, a plague of iron and fire. The difference was small, but I could taste it. Hatred, not the casual dismissal of the past, but the bitter kind that only comes after fear, and fear makes predators dangerous. Within 3 months of Titan, the Confederacy called for an alliance. What they called a unification of civilized powers to crush the human aberration. Old rivals, ancient enemies, even species that had fought wars for centuries came together with one common cause: annihilating Earth. For the first time in galactic history, the predators stood shoulder to shoulder against us. We should have broken then. By every metric, we were doomed. Outnumbered 100 to 1, out-teed by millennia, outflanked on every frontier. But war isn't fought on metrics. War is fought on will, and humanity's will was forged in centuries of clawing survival. The factories never stopped. Earth's skies glowed red from smog and fire. The forges screaming day and night. The moon was one vast barrel. Rail platforms firing test shots that cracked the crust. Mars rebuilt even as it bled, its canyons filled with rail factories and launch yards, every rock, every asteroid we could drag into orbit became a weapon. We weren't building ships, we were building hammers, and men like me, men who had bled at Mars, fought at Titan, were the nails holding it all together. The Resolute wasn't just a ship anymore, she was my coffin, my fortress, my home. Her guns spoke the language of survival, and every time they thundered, another shard of alien arrogance broke. My crew followed me, not because I inspired them, but because they had nothing left but this war. Brothers, fathers, sons, all bound by the same iron oath, make them bleed. Alliance struck first. They came in numbers I can still barely comprehend. An armada so vast it blotted out the stars over Jupiter, Confederacy crystal warships, Sarathan hive carriers, the vast fractal constructs of the Viath Syndicate, even the obsidian juggernauts of the Zoran Dominion, dozens of species united, their fleets numbering in the hundreds. Against them we fielded less than 50 ships, half of them little more than steel coffins bolted with guns. But we weren't defending space that day. We were defending the rail. Jupiter's orbit bristled with the newest terror. Humanity had birthed the Leviathan. Guns, that was the name soldiers gave them. Half in fear, half in reverence, cannons, the size of cities dug deep into the bones of Ganymede and Callisto, their barrels stretching for Killam. Each one could fire a slug the size of a building. A tungsten spear accelerated until its kinetic energy rivaled a nuclear detonation. The aliens had never seen anything like it. When their armada closed in, we opened fire. The first Leviathan shot cut through 3 Confederacy warships in a single pass, their crystalline hulls shattering like glass. The second broke apart, a Sarathan hive carrier, spilling broodlings into vacuum where they froze, writhing. Every shot was a nightmare, a reminder that physics, raw, brutal physics, didn't care about arrogance or technology. But for every alien ship we tore apart, 10 more pressed forward. Their teleport screens glowed, flickering as coded rounds slipped past, but their sheer numbers overwhelmed us. Energy lances carved through orbital defenses. Hive swarms descended on our escorts, fractal ships folded around slugs, absorbing impacts. With self-healing armor, I watched friends die by the thousands. The ironclad broke apart under gravitic fire, her reactor igniting in a sphere of white light that consumed 5 of our own frigates. The Harbinger lost her engines and drifted helplessly into the maw of a hive swarm, torn apart piece by piece, until her comms went silent. The Resolute herself burned. Half my crew was gone by the time we fought our way free, her hull scorched, her guns half melted from overfire. I can still hear the screams in the comms, the begging, the rage, the silence. But we held because of the Leviathans, because every time the enemy pushed forward, another tungsten spear answered, breaking their lines, scattering their arrogance into shards. By the time the armada retreated, a third of their fleet was gone. Hundreds of ships shattered, their corpses orbiting Jupiter like trophies of steel. We hadn't won, not truly. Earth's defenses were gutted, our fleet crippled, our worlds burning, but the Alliance hadn't won either, and that was enough. It was after Jupiter that the whispers began among our scientists. Teleporters, the very weapon that made The galaxy untouchable that let them move armies across light years, strike without warning, erase our slugs mid-flight. For years it had been their shield, their sword. But now cracks had formed, the coded rounds had proven something. Teleporters weren't perfect, they weren't magic. They were systems. Systems that could be tricked, jammed, overloaded, and if something can be tricked, it can be stolen. I remember the first time they showed me the prototype, a crude thing, ugly wires spilling like veins, its core humming with unstable energy. It wasn't elegant like the Confederacy's arrays. It was brutal, human-made, a bastardized version ripped from wreckage and rebuilt with guesswork and desperation. But when they flipped the switch and a crate vanished from the lab and reappeared 10 m away, every man in the room held his breath. For the first time, teleporters weren't just theirs, they were ours. The implications were staggering. We weren't ready to replace railguns, not yet. Maybe not ever. But as weapons, as a way to strike back with the same arrogance they had wielded. The thought lit a fire in every soldier. I knew, still I was a soldier, not a scientist. My war was fought with steel and fire, not theories, and the galaxy wasn't waiting for us to perfect our stolen toys. The Alliance came again. Harder this time, smaller fleets but more coordinated. Surgical strikes meant to cut our shipyards, bleed our industry dry. They hit Neptune, then Saturn, then colonies in the belt. Each time they struck with teleporters, dropping troops behind our lines, sabotaging rail platforms, tearing out our heart piece by piece. And each time we bled, I led men through the ruins of Titan again, fighting Sarathan drones in tunnels filled with corpses. I watched the Resolute limp back to dock for the third time, her hull patched with scrap, her crew more ghosts than men. I buried comrades until I forgot their names, but with every strike, with every death, humanity grew sharper, stronger, angrier. And then came Europa. They thought they'd found our weakness. Shipyard hidden beneath the ice, building the next wave of Leviathans. The Alliance sent 20 ships, half of them teleport-equipped assault carriers. They expected another slaughter. Instead, they found the first true fruits of human desperation. When they tried to teleport inside our defenses, their arrays screamed and failed. Soldiers meant to appear behind our guns never arrived, or worse, arrived inside solid walls, their screams echoing through the ice. The prototype jammers had worked. For the first time, teleporters weren't there. Blade, they were ours to blunt. And when their fleets pressed close, we unleashed something new, rail slugs, laced with teleport interference. Projectiles that carried more than mass. They carried disruption, jamming their shields, scrambling their arrays. The first round hit a Vioth ship, and I swear I saw the entire vessel glitch, folding in on itself as its teleport systems collapsed. The galaxy's arrogance shattered again that day, not just from steel, but from the very weapon they had once lorded over us. After Europa, there was no going back. We were no longer the primitives with slugs. We were thieves of gods, stealing their fire and turning it against them. Railguns still roared, but now the battlefield was tainted with the stench of broken teleporters, the sight of alien soldiers ripped apart by the very tech they had once mocked us with. And I knew deep down that the galaxy would never forgive us for it, because in their arrogance they had believed themselves untouchable, and Nothing breeds hate like being proven wrong. War grinds men down. By the time Europa was over, I wasn't sure what was left of me, the man who'd first stood on the deck of the Vanguard seemed like a ghost, someone I half remembered from a different lifetime. I had scars now, inside more than out. My crew had been burned, buried, atomized, and replaced so many times that I stopped learning their names, but one truth kept me breathing. The galaxy was afraid. Europa had broken something deep in there. Arrogance. Teleporters were no longer sacred. They had always been their most untouchable tool, the ace that put them above all other species. Now they faltered, jammed, glitched. The whispers spread across alien channels the humans can break. Teleporters. It was small, but fear always starts small. Our scientists, half geniuses and half madmen, didn't stop after Europa. They pushed harder. They didn't just want to break teleporters. They wanted to own them. They wanted to twist the galaxy's pride into its nightmare. And they succeeded. The first time I saw it, it was on a moon base near Saturn. They called it Project Spectre. A teleport array, human-built, ugly as hell, cobbled from wreckage and sweat that didn't just move objects, it weaponized the process. They loaded a crate of tungsten slugs into the chamber, flipped the switch, and teleported them directly into the armor of a derelict ship floating outside the station. Not against it, into it. The slugs reappeared halfway inside the hull, materializing where metal already existed. The ship split apart like an egg crushed from the inside. I remember standing there watching the wreck twist and break. One of the scientists looked at me with eyes wide and bloodshot, whispering like he'd just spoken to God. They thought teleporters were for soldiers. We've made them into bullets. And in that moment, I realized the war had changed. The first live test came at Enceladus. The Alliance had returned, this time with a fleet of mixed species there. Arrogance shaky, but still burning with hatred. They came to smash our mining operations, to choke our factories and cut off our rails. We met them with the old weapons first. Railguns thundered. Coated rounds split shields. Leviathan guns fired from Titan. But when their carriers advanced, dropping teleporting troops onto our defenses, we gave them something new. The Resolute had been refitted with Spectre arrays. Crude, unstable, dangerous, but war doesn't wait for perfection. I stood on the deck, listening to the hum as the new system spooled up. My crew tense with fear. None of us knew if it would work or if we'd tear ourselves apart trying. Target locked, my weapons officer muttered. His hands shook as he keyed in the sequence. Engaging Spectre shot. The ship shuddered. A low groan tore through the hull as the teleport coils fired. For a heartbeat, I thought we'd die. Then the enemy carrier in front of us convulsed. Half a dozen tungsten rods materialized inside its reactor core. The explosion was instant, a ball of light so bright it blinded us through polarized glass. When it faded, nothing remained of the carrier but molten fragments drifting like ash. The comms erupted in screams, enemy and human both on their side, disbelief and horror on ours, shock and awe. Reload. I growled, my throat dry. We fired again. Another ship ripped apart from within, armor splitting like paper. Again, a cruiser folded as slugs appeared in its engines. Again, destroyer screamed into static as its bridge and half its crew were teleported into vacuum. The galaxy had seen teleporters as a crown jewel. Now they were a knife we twisted into their ribs. Enceladus became a massacre. The enemy didn't retreat, they fled their comms. Didn't bark orders anymore, they shrieked panic, they're putting weapons inside our hulls. Impossible, they can't retreat, retreat. When it was over, the void was filled with wreckage, shattered Arrogance. Drifting among frozen shards, my crew stared at the carnage in silence. Some cheered, some wept, some just sat there. Hollow-eyed me, I felt nothing, just the quiet certainty that we had crossed a line. The galaxy noticed. They didn't call us primitive anymore. They didn't call us unstable. Now they called us something new, abominations. Because we had stolen their pride, their sacred tool, and turned it into something darker than they had ever dared. Their response was swift. No more patrols, no more surgical strikes. Now it was extermination. Entire fleets descended on human colonies, burning worlds to ash, erasing settlements from history. Civilians slaughtered not because they were threats, but because they were human. The Alliance wanted to break us, to make us beg for mercy. Instead, they fed the fire. For every colony burned, we built 10 more guns. For every city erased, we forged steel in its ashes. Humanity became a machine of war, fueled by grief and vengeance. And specter spread. Soon, every major carrier had an array. Every Leviathan gun was modified. Every ground battery built teleport warheads. Crude but devastating, we learned to rip holes in fleets with invisible knives, to teleport explosives inside shield generators, to scatter soldiers into walls and oceans. It wasn't clean, it wasn't noble, it was slaughter. And I saw what it did to us. Men who once fought with anger now fought with emptiness. My crew didn't flinch when Spectre shots vaporized thousands. They just reloaded. We didn't bury the dead anymore, not properly. Too many bodies, too little time. We cremated them in reactors, names lost to the void. War was no longer about victory. It was about erasure. Either we erased them or they erased us. Nothing in between. Greatest proof came at Proxima. It was the largest fleet battle in human history. 200 alien ships descended on the system, their formation tight, their arrogance returning with numbers. They believed sheer force could overwhelm us. No matter our new tricks, we met them with everything. Leviathans roared from hidden batteries. Frigates spat storms of rail fire. Carriers launched specter barges, tearing enemy ships apart from within. The void became a slaughterhouse of light and fire. Every second another explosion, another scream. I will never forget the sight of the Zoran juggernaut, a black fortress, Killam long, bristling with weapons that had crushed civilizations before we had even left Earth. It advanced, unstoppable, its gravitic shields bending our slugs into useless arcs. We hit it with specter, not slugs this time. A warhead teleported directly into its core. The juggernaut folded in on itself, collapsing like a dying star, its bulk tearing apart in a cascade of explosions that lit the system brighter than a sun. The shock wave crippled a dozen ships around it. When the light faded, there was nothing left but ruin. Proxima was ours, but victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like damnation, because with every battle I realized we were becoming what they feared most. Not just survivors, not just warriors, monsters. The men on my ship didn't laugh anymore. They didn't talk, they fought, they killed, they bled, and when the battle was done, they stared into nothing, hollow and broken, waiting for the next slaughter. I was no different. Every time I gave the order to fire, Spectre, I knew what it meant: thousands of lives erased in an instant, without warning, without a chance to fight back. It wasn't war anymore, it was execution. And yet I gave the order again, and again, because the alternative was extinction. Railguns had given us survival, teleporters gave us power, and with power came the truth. The galaxy would never forgive us, never accept us, never let us live in peace. So we would fight until their arrogance shattered, until their fleets burned, until humanity stood alone in the ashes of the stars. That night after Proxima, I sat alone in my quarters. The hum of the Resolute echoed around me, the faint smell of oil and blood still clinging to my uniform. I looked at the medals they had given me, pieces of metal meant to honor the slaughter I'd ordered. I thought of Mars, of Titan, of Europa, of every face I'd seen vanish into fire and steel, and I realized something I'd never admit to my crew, to command, to anyone. We weren't fighting for survival anymore, we were fighting for dominance. Because the galaxy had mocked us, scorned us, tried to erase us, and now, in their ashes, we wanted more than survival, we wanted vengeance. Railguns first, teleporters later, and after that the galaxy itself. There's a line every war crosses, the point where survival ends and conquest begins. For humanity, that line was crossed. After Proxima, the aliens thought we would stop there, that we would bleed, rebuild, and wait for their next wave. That we were still playing defense, still clawing for scraps of survival. They were wrong, because Proxima didn't just give us victory, it gave us momentum. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't running, we were advancing. Command called it the Counter-Strike Offensive, a name meant for history books, for speeches back on Earth. Soldiers called it something simpler: the burnings. We weren't just holding ground anymore, we were burning. Theirs, the first world to fall, was Valor 9, a Sarathan hive planet. I still see it every time I close my eyes. We jumped into orbit with a fleet of 15 carriers, including the Resolute, her hull patched and scarred but still alive. Below us sprawled the hive world. Vast plains of hexagonal towers, brood chambers the size of cities, billions of drones swarming across the surface. Sarthans had mocked us for years, calling us apes with clubs, pests to be exterminated. This time we exterminated them. The old way would have been orbital bombardment, railguns flattening cities, fire raining down until nothing was left. But that wasn't our way anymore. Not since Spectre. We didn't fire on their defenses, we fired inside them. Teleport warheads appeared in brood chambers, detonating before the drones even knew they were under attack. Explosives materialized inside hive queens, shredding them into pulp before they could scream. Towers collapsed as tungsten rods phased directly into their foundations. It wasn't a battle, it was a purge. The comms filled with alien screams, chittering voices howling, and frequencies that clawed at the ears, begging, shrieking, dying. I listened to it all. From the deck of the Resolute, my jaw clenched, my heart a stone. My men didn't cheer, they just reloaded. In less than 6 hours, Valor 9 was silent. The hive was dead, billions gone, and for the first time the galaxy understood what we had become. News of Valor 9 spread faster than light. Confederacy broadcasted it as proof of our monstrosity. They called us genocidal, unfit for the stars, and abomination that had to be erased, but their words carried a tremor now, fear. Because for all their hatred, for all their propaganda, the truth was undeniable. They couldn't stop us. We had taken their greatest weapon and turned it into something worse than they ever imagined. Teleporters had once been their shield, their throne, their arrogance. Now they were our scalpel. And we cut deep. The burnings spread. Every week another world fell, not just Sarahan hives, but Confederacy crystal colonies, Veth fractal forges, even Zoran fortresses that had stood untouched for millennia. None were safe, none untouchable. I remember Zora Prime, their capital, the pride of their dominion, its surface black as obsidian, its cities carved into mountains of shadow. They thought it invincible. We proved them wrong. Spectre arrays tore their fortresses apart from the inside. Teleport warheads collapsed mountain bunkers, killing millions before alarms even sounded. Their grand palace, a structure older than humanity itself, cracked and fell when a tungsten rod materialized in its heart. The arrogance of the Zorn shattered that day. I heard it in their comms, the disbelief, the fury, the begging. And when their capital burned, I saw something colder in my men's eyes. Satisfaction. But war doesn't come without a price. Every world we burned bled us too. The Alliance didn't sit idle. They struck back wherever they could, hitting supply lines, ambushing convoys, slaughtering colonies that couldn't defend themselves. Earth burned more than once. Not the planet itself, but the cities in orbit, the stations circling the moon, the factories on Mars. They couldn't break our worlds, but they could scar them, and they did. Every time we pushed forward, they clawed back. Every time we shattered their fleets, they butchered our civilians. And through it all, I felt the weight pressing down on me. I had been a soldier once. Now I was a butcher. I gave orders that killed millions, that burned worlds, that turned civilizations into ash. My men followed without question, not because they loved me, but because they had nothing else. We weren't fighting for survival anymore. We were fighting for vengeance, and vengeance doesn't end. The turning point came at Dressergate. It wasn't a planet, but a fortress system, a choke point between Confederacy space and the core worlds. They fortified it with everything they had. Dozens of fleets, planetary shields, teleporter arrays layered in rings, each one designed to scramble our Spectre shots. It was the most heavily defended position in the galaxy, and command ordered us to take it. The battle lasted 3 days, 3 days of railguns tearing the void into ribbons, of Leviathan guns spitting tungsten spears that cracked planets. 3 days of teleport warheads glitching in and out of existence, sometimes hitting, sometimes fizzling, sometimes tearing apart the wrong target, including our own ships. I lost count of how many men died. I lost count of how many ships burned. The void around Dresar was a graveyard by the second day, wreckage drifting in fields so thick that navigation became a nightmare. But on the third day, we broke through. Not with numbers, not with ships, with rage. The Resolute was bleeding, her hull fractured, half her crew gone, but her Spectre array still hummed, still hungry. We targeted the central teleporter hub, the heart of their defenses. We didn't fire slugs this time. We fired a reactor. One of our escorts scuttled itself, its reactor ripped out and fed into the Spectre chamber, then we teleported it straight into the hub. The explosion lit the system like a new sun. The hub shattered, teleporters collapsing in on themselves, their network unraveling in a cascade of quantum fire. Every array linked to it shorted out, frying ships, burning out defenses, scattering fleets. Dresar Gate fell, and when it did, the galaxy knew the truth. Nowhere was safe anymore. After Dresar, the Alliance fractured. Some species still fought, still screamed for our annihilation, but others began to whisper of surrender, not peace, surrender, because they saw what we were, what we had become, and they knew they couldn't stop us. The Confederacy tried to hold them together, broadcasting rage and propaganda, but cracks spread fast. Old enemies turned on each other again. Rivalries rekindled. Fear broke their unity faster than our guns ever could, and humanity pressed forward. We weren't an alliance anymore. We weren't a desperate defense. We were a tide of steel and fire sweeping across the stars, burning arrogance from every world we touched. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was emptiness. Every world we burned, I watched men lose themselves. Some reveled in it, drunk on vengeance. Others grew silent, hollow ghosts walking in uniforms. My crew barely spoke anymore. They moved like machines, loading Spectre arrays, firing railguns, killing without thought. And me, I was no better. I gave the orders again and again. Burn this world, shatter that fleet, teleport the warheads. I told myself it was survival. I told myself it was justice, but deep down I knew the truth. We weren't surviving, we weren't avenging, we were conquering. The last transmission I intercepted from the Confederacy still echoes in my head, a voice alien and broken, shrieking across the void. They are not men, they are not soldiers, they are extinction given flesh. Maybe they were right, because as I stood on the deck of the Resolute, staring at the wreckage of Drear Gate, at the burning worlds behind us, at the fleet that marched forward into the core, I realized something simple: rail guns first, teleporters later. And now we were the Arrogance, and soon the galaxy would shatter. The galaxy was breaking. After Drear Gate, the great alliance cracked like glass under a hammer. The Sarathans were shattered, their hives burning. The Zorans had lost their capital, their arrogance bleeding into silence. The Confederacy screamed for unity, but their fleets were hollowed, their crystal fortresses nothing but wreckage. Drifting in space, they had called us primitive, they had called us unstable. Now they called us something else: death. But if the galaxy thought humanity would stop, they didn't know us at all. Command's orders were clear: push forward, don't stop until the Confederacy itself burned. The fleet gathered its all for what they called the march to core. Every carrier, every Leviathan, every Spectre array we had left was pulled into one great armada. Thousands of ships patched and scarred, engines smoking, hulls bristling with guns. They weren't elegant like the fleets of the Confederacy. They weren't perfect. They were human, ugly, brutal, relentless. I stood on the deck of the Resolute, staring at the men around me, veterans. Everyone, their eyes hollow, their uniforms stained, their hands steady on controls they had long since fused to. None of them spoke, none of them needed to. We were past speeches, past hope, past fear. Now there was only war. The first worlds fell easily, fractured defenses, fleets scattered, garrisons. that surrendered before we fired a shot. Some begged for mercy, others fought too. The last drone screaming defiance as we burned their cities from within. But there was no mercy left in us. Every surrender was answered with fire, every plea with silence, teleport warheads inside palaces, rail slugs through planetary cores. We didn't just kill their armies, we erased their civilizations. The burnings had become the cleansings. I watched it happen from orbit, cities collapsing into rubble, skies filled with smoke, oceans boiling under detonations, and my men didn't flinch, they didn't cheer. They just worked, their faces empty, their souls already ash, and me, I gave the orders, fire, loads, specter again. Each word another nail in the coffin of my humanity, but the galaxy wasn't finished yet. Desperation makes predators dangerous, and the Confederacy was nothing if not desperate. They called it the Eclipse Protocol. We first saw it at Hurden Reach. Confederacy fleet folded in, not to fight us but to die. Their ships were loaded with reactors stripped of safety, cores primed for detonation, suicide runs. They charged us head-on, shields blazing, weapons firing until their holes cracked. Then they rammed, one after another, their ships slammed into ours, reactors tearing open, explosions ripping through the void. The Resolute shuddered as a Confederacy frigate struck her starboard side, fire ripping through decks, men screaming as bulkheads caved. We barely survived, half the ship burning, reactors straining against overload, but we held, we always held. Hurden Reach burned with the corpses of 50 enemy ships and 20 of ours. The void was littered with wreckage, fire trailing across the black like scars carved into the stars, and yet we advanced. Then came the Sarathans' last gamble. They called it the Swarm Eternal. Millions of drones bred in secret, launched in one massive wave. They didn't come at us with ships or fleets. They came as a tide, a living storm of kitten and rage, blotting out the sensors, slamming into our hulls, tearing at our guns with claws and acid. The void became chaos. Every ship was its own battlefield. Men fighting in corridors, drones pouring through hull breaches, blood and ichor staining steel. I fought with my hands that day, a rifle in one grip, a blade in the other, cutting down drones that swarmed the deck. My crew fought beside me, shoulder to shoulder, screaming rage into the chaos. The swarm died on us, not because we were stronger, but because we were more stubborn. Railguns tore holes in the tide, specter arrays ripped drones into walls and bulkheads. Leviathans fired slugs that turned clusters into vapor. By the time it was over, the swarm floated dead in space, a sea of corpses drifting among the stars, and still we advanced. The alliance was breaking apart faster. Now, some worlds declared neutrality. Others tried to surrender, but surrender meant nothing to us anymore. Humanity didn't want peace, we wanted erasure. At Rieth Prime, we burned a planet that had already surrendered. Their fleet powered down, their leaders offered us their weapons, their cities opened their gates, and still we fired. I remember their last broadcast, a voice trembling, but defiant. We yield, we yield, we yield, we answered with silence. The first Spectre warhead appeared in their capital, the second in their atmosphere, generators the third in their oceans. Within an hour, Rieth Prime was gone. My crew didn't question it, command didn't question it, even I didn't question it, and that was when I realized the galaxy wasn't the only one that had shattered. We had two. At night, when the ship was quiet and the hum of the reactors was the only sound, I would sit in my quarters and stare at my hands that had once built, once held, once lived. Now they were soaked in ash. I thought of Earth, of home, of the seas I'd never see again, the cities I'd left behind. I thought of the faces of men I'd buried, of the enemies I'd killed. I thought of the voices that had begged, screamed, cursed, and I wondered if we were any better than the monsters we fought. Maybe we weren't, maybe we were worse. The Confederacy grew desperate. Their broadcasts no longer mocked. They begged, pleaded, called for truces, ceasefires, negotiations. We didn't answer. The fleet pressed into their core, and as we marched I saw something strange. Not resistance, not defiance, silence, worlds abandoned, cities empty, fleets scattered. The galaxy wasn't just losing, it was collapsing. They weren't fighting us anymore. They were running from humanity, running from me. The Resolute had become a ghost ship. By then, half my original crew was gone, replaced by faces I didn't bother to learn. They moved like machines, eyes hollow, hands steady. One night my first officer sat across from me, silent for a long time before he finally spoke. "Sir," he said, his voice cracked, "do you think we'll recognize ourselves when this is over?" I stared at him, weight of 1,000 battles pressing on my chest. "No," I said, "but we'll still be alive." He nodded once, then walked away. I never saw him again. The last great fleet of the Confederacy met us at Cairo's Reach, 1,000 ships, the remnants of their pride, gathered for one final stand. They broadcast one last message: humanity, this is your end. We will not kneel, we will not run, we will burn you here. My men listened in silence. Then we fired. Railguns screamed, leviathans roared, specter arrays tore ships apart. From within, the void became fire, explosions tearing across the black, wreckage scattering in every direction. The Confederacy fought with everything they had: ships rammed, reactors detonated, fleets burned. But they couldn't stop us. Nothing could stop us anymore. By the third day, Cairo's Reach was silent. The last Confederacy fleet gone. The galaxy had no more shields, no more arrogance, no more hope, only us. When it was over, I stood on the deck of the Resolute, staring into the void. The stars looked different now, not like lights in the dark, not like hope. They looked like targets, and I knew deep in my chest that we weren't done. We couldn't stop, because vengeance doesn't stop, because survival had become conquest, because humanity had become the thing the galaxy feared most: extinction given flesh. And for the first time I asked myself the question I had buried since Mars: were we still human, or had we become something else entirely? Victory was supposed to feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like silence. After Cairo's Reach, the galaxy lay in ruins. The Confederacy was gone, their fleets shattered, their capital worlds burned to ash. The Surthans were extinct, their hives silent and cold. The Zarans had vanished, their obsidian fortresses nothing but debris drifting in forgotten systems. Even the lesser powers, those who had once laughed at our primitive slugs, were broken. Their cities cracked, their people scattered. The galaxy wasn't just conquered, it was hollow, and humanity stood alone. The Resolute drifted through the wreckage of Cairo's Reach. Her hull was Scarred, her guns blackened her decks. Quiet, what had once been a ship filled with men was now a tomb, half her crew dead, the other half ghosts walking. I wandered her corridors, the hum of the reactors my only companion. I saw faces that no longer looked human. Eyes hollow, skin pale under the harsh light. Hands that trembled only when they weren't holding a weapon. We had won the war, but what did we have left? Earth broadcasted the victory with pride. Politicians on the home world called it the dawn of a new age. They showed footage of broken fleets, burning worlds, shattered arrogance. They told the people that humanity had secured its place in the galaxy forever, but the footage never showed the men, not the broken soldiers who sat in silence staring at walls, not the faces of crews who buried their friends in reactors, names forgotten, bodies burned to fuel the next battle, not the commanders who gave orders that erased entire civilizations and then sat alone in their quarters, wondering if they were still human. I had become one of those commanders, and every time I looked at my reflection in the steel, I didn't see myself anymore. I saw extinction wearing my face. The war should have ended at Cairo's reach, but it didn't. The fleet still marched. The guns still fired because command wasn't satisfied with victory. They wanted control. Every system we had burned had to be occupied. Every colony had to be seized. Every scrap of alien technology had to be stripped, rebuilt, reforged in human hands. The burnings had become the occupations. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were wardens, enforcers, executioners. The few alien survivors were rounded up, herded into camps, studied, dissected. Broken, they weren't seen as prisoners. They were seen as resources. I remember one in particular, a Sarathan drone captured after a skirmish on a fringe world. It was small, broken, its wings torn, its body scarred. They kept it in a containment chamber, watching it like it was some kind of animal. One night I passed the chamber. The drone raised its head and stared at me through the glass. Its mandibles moved, its voice weak, broken but clear enough to understand. You are worse than us. I didn't answer because it was right. The fleet spread deeper into the galaxy, hunting down every last fragment of resistance. Some worlds surrendered. Others fought to the last. None were spared. The resolute became a weapon of occupation, no longer fighting fleets, but burning cities, enforcing obedience, teleporting warheads into bunkers that dared resist. My men obeyed without question. They didn't ask why. They didn't care. They were too far gone for questions, but I cared. Every order I gave cut deeper into me. Every city burned. Every family erased. Every scream echoing through the comms. I told myself it was survival that we couldn't risk leaving enemies behind, that if we didn't erase them, they'd rise again. But I knew it was a lie. It wasn't survival anymore. It was conquest. The galaxy had once been full of life. Millions of species, billions of worlds, endless cultures and civilizations. Now it was quiet, too quiet. We didn't just defeat them, we silenced them. The stars, once filled with traffic and light, were now graveyards. Wreckage drifted where fleets had burned. Worlds glowed red where cities once thrived. Silence spread across the void, heavier than any weapon we had built, and in that silence I began to wonder, what had we actually won? One night as the Resolute drifted through a conquered system, my first officer came to me. He was one of the last veterans from Mars. His face scarred, his voice gravel from years of smoke and screams. "Sir," he said, "when this is over, where do we go?" I stared at him, unable to answer. Because I didn't know. We had spent so long fighting, so long burning, so long erasing that I couldn't imagine anything else. War had become who we were. Without it, what were we? The politicians back home spoke of empire, of colonies spreading across the stars, of humanity's rightful throne over a broken galaxy. But I didn't see an empire, I saw ghosts. Every ship I passed in orbit, every station we built, every world we occupied, I saw the same thing, hollow eyes, silent crews, soldiers who had forgotten how to live. We had beaten the galaxy, but in the process we had beaten ourselves. I thought of Earth, sometimes of oceans I'd never see again, of forests I'd forgotten, of cities filled with laughter and light. But those thoughts felt like dreams, distant, faded. The Earth I remembered didn't exist anymore, even if the planet was still there, even if the people still lived. Humanity had changed. We weren't builders anymore. We weren't dreamers. We were killers, and killers don't go home. The last resistance we faced wasn't from fleets or armies. It was from whispers, scattered transmissions across the void. Survivors, hidden colonies, remnants of civilizations we thought destroyed. They didn't fight us with guns, they fought us with words. Broadcasts filled the stars, messages of defiance, of hatred, of curses. They called us monsters, demons, extinction incarnate. And the worst part, they weren't wrong. I stood on the deck of the Resolute, listening to one of those broadcasts, a voice, trembling but strong. We will not forgive, we will not forget. Humanity will drown in the blood it has spilled. I turned off the comm, not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. Victory had been our goal, survival had been our reason, vengeance had been our fire. But now that the galaxy was broken, now that the Arrogance had shattered, all that was left was the truth. We hadn't survived. We had become the very thing we fought, extinction. And in the silence of the stars, I finally understood. Winning the war didn't mean peace. It meant we were alone, alone in a galaxy we had burned, alone with the ghosts of the enemies we had killed, alone with the ashes of what we used to be. I don't know what comes next. Empire, maybe, colonies, expansion, a human galaxy built on bones. But I know one thing: when the history books are written, when the politicians on Earth boast of our triumph, when they speak of humanity's rise to dominance, I won't be there. Because I know the truth: we didn't rise, we fell, and in falling we dragged the galaxy down with us. The stars are quiet now. Too quiet. Sometimes when I stare into the void, I imagine I can hear them screaming, the voices of the dead, the echoes of arrogance, shattered and silent. Maybe it's just my mind, or maybe it's the truth. Because silence has a sound, and it's the loudest thing in the galaxy. And it belongs to us. The war was over. That was what command told us. That was what the broadcast shouted across Earth, Mars, and every colony still alive. Humanity had won. The galaxy was ours. But when I looked out at the stars, I didn't see victory. I saw graves. The Resolute drifted in orbit above a dead world. I couldn't even remember its name anymore. Another Confederacy colony burned to ash, its city split by rail fire, its oceans boiled by specter detonations. It had been alive once, thriving. Arrogant, mocking us. Now it was just dust like all the others. The galaxy had been full once, now it was silent, and the silence was worse than any battle. My crew moved like ghosts, the men who had survived Mars, Titan, Dresar. Chiros, they were still here, but hollow. They ate without tasting, slept without dreaming, worked without speaking. They weren't men anymore. They were machines with blood in their veins. And I was no different. The weight of command had crushed me down to bone, and ash, I gave the orders, always the same. Fire, reload, burn. Until the words felt like chains in my mouth. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a soldier. I didn't see a man. I saw extinction staring back at me. Command called me a hero. They sent medals, promotions, messages of honor. They told me I was the hammer that broke the galaxy, the commander who led humanity into its rightful place among the stars. But I knew the truth. Heroes don't bury billions. Heroes don't erase civilizations. Heroes don't look at a galaxy filled with silence and call it victory. Heroes build, and I had only destroyed. It was after Ceros reached that I began to dream again, not of battles, not of screams, but of earth, of oceans, forests, cities filled with light. But they weren't real. When I woke, I realized I couldn't even remember the sound of waves anymore. I couldn't remember the smell of rain or the feeling of grass under my feet. All I remembered was steel, smoke, blood. I had lost Earth, not because it was gone, but because I was the survivors. The few aliens who hadn't been erased whispered across the void, small broadcasts, hidden channels, messages carried on fractured frequencies. They called us monsters. They called us demons. They called us extinction given flesh. And for once I didn't disagree, because I remembered the Sarathans begging as their hives burned. I remembered the Zorans screaming as their capital cracked. I remembered Riilo Prime surrendering, pleading, and still we erased them. That wasn't survival. That wasn't vengeance. That was slaughter, and I had led it. The fleet didn't stop. Even after victory, command pushed forward. Colonies had to be occupied, resources stripped, survivors hunted. They spoke of empire now, of humanity rising to claim the stars as its throne. But all I saw was rot. Ships filled with ghosts, worlds filled with ash, men who no longer remembered why they fought. We hadn't built an empire. We had built a graveyard. One night I sat alone in my quarters. The hum of the Resolute was the only sound, steady and cold. I stared at the medals on my desk, pieces of metal meant to honor slaughter. I picked one up, heavy in my hand, a golden star engraved with words that meant nothing anymore. And I threw it across the room. It clattered against the wall, hollow and empty, just like us. My first officer came to me again. His face was more scar than skin, his eyes tired, his voice cracked. "Sir," he said, "what happens now?" I wanted to tell him the truth, that nothing happens, that there's nothing left but silence and ash, that we've won everything and lost more. But I didn't. I just stared at him, my voice low, hollow. "We keep going." He nodded once like a man accepting a death sentence and walked away. And I hated myself for saying it, because I knew it was a lie. The last battle I fought wasn't with fleets or worlds. It was with myself. Every night I saw their faces, not just my men but theirs. Aliens screaming as Spectre tore them apart, children crying as their cities burned, leaders begging for mercy as we Silence them, I heard their voices in the silence of the ship. You are worse than us, you are extinction, you are death. And I couldn't deny it because they were right. The galaxy feared our railguns. It feared our teleporters. It feared the rage that had carried us from Mars to Kiros. But what I feared most was the day the war truly ended, because when the guns went silent, when the fleet stopped marching, when there were no more enemies left to burn, what would we be then? Not survivors, not soldiers, not conquerors, just monsters alone in a galaxy of silence. The last transmission I ever received wasn't from command. It wasn't from Earth. It was from a survivor, a voice carried on a fractured frequency, faint but clear. You think you have won, you think you are alone, but you are wrong. We will wait, we will remember, and when you fall, we will rise from your ashes. Signal cut. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty comms, listening to the silence that followed. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Not for humanity, but for the galaxy, because maybe, just maybe, when we were gone, something better would rise in our place. I don't know how long the Resolute will last. She's old, broken, scarred beyond repair, like me, but I'll keep her running, keep her drifting, keep her guns silent, not because I believe in victory anymore, not because I believe in survival, but because someone has to remember. Someone has to carry the weight. Someone has to whisper the truth, even if no one listens. The truth that railguns came first, that teleporters came later, that arrogance shattered and we shattered with it, that we didn't rise, we fell. And in falling, we became the very thing we swore to destroy: extinction. The stars are quiet now, but silence doesn't last forever. One day someone will rise, someone will rebuild, someone will bring life back to the galaxy we burned. And when they do, I hope they never remember us, because we don't deserve to be remembered, not as heroes, not as survivors, not even as men, only as the shadow that came before the dawn. Rail guns first, teleporters later. The galaxy's arrogance shattered, and so did we.